former president of Kosovo, Atifete Jahjaga. Atifete is a Kosovar politician who served as the fourth president of Kosovo. Her background, she graduated from the University of Pristina from the Faculty of Law, and upon her election went on to become the first female president of Kosovo and one of the youngest female presidents in the world. Could you please join me in wishing her a warm round of applause with a welcome?
Thank you. Well, dear Mohammed, honorable members of the Cambridge Union, members of the academia, dear students, my ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for this very warm welcome, and thank you, Mohammed, for such a kind introduction. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm truly honored to be given the floor to share my story and talk about my experience at the Cambridge Union, the oldest debating society in the world, which has featured so many remarkable speakers from across the world. I feel especially privileged to be the first Kosovo politician to be received by this union since 1999, when the war ended in my country. Back then, at the height of the Kosovo crisis, the union hosted the Kosovo Forum, which saw representatives from the Kosovo Liberation Army, the Serbian government, and the UNHCR come together for the first time to debate, to agree and to disagree, to accept and to reject, to admit and deny, to explore and to ignore potential solutions that would end the bloodshed in my own country. The belief that conflict, divergence, the clash of the ideas are the only way to achieve progress and improvement has always been nourished by the Union. And I can only agree with the premise that true progression is enabled by debate and the freedom of the expression. Freedom, equality, and justice are the principles on which Kosovo declared its independence back in 2008, and we continue to foster our democracy by embracing, cultivating, and increasing diversity and inclusion in our own society. Today, Kosovo is one of the newest countries in the world and has been recognized as an independent state by more than 100 other countries. With 53% of the population under the age of 25, it has the youngest population in the entire Europe. Our youth, young and bright people, just like you, is one of the most valuable assets that we have. Yet, despite the numerous obstacles we face, the staggering economy, the high rates of the unemployment, the lack of the freedom of movement within the European Union, and other problems we still face, our young people are breaking barriers and borders and showcasing their talents and skills all across the world. Kosovo has so much potential, which the world has not seen yet. And we are continuously exploring new ways and opportunities to develop our own country, to enable our people to live better and pave the way for a better and more prosperous future. But the path to get at where we are today was rocky and very long. So my dear friends and dear members of the Cambridge Union, Kosovo inherited a painful legacy from the war that happened in our country in 1998 and 1999. Men witnessed how their wives were raped and how their sisters were raped. Women saw how their sons, brothers, and fathers, and their husbands being killed or taken away to never return again. Around 13,000 people were killed during the war. Many more were wounded. Some of 20,000 women and men were raped, while more than 1,600 people still remaining missing. The end of the war has opened a new chapter in the history of my country of Kosovo, And with a new start, new challenges came. The protean chaos of the aftermath of the war was crippling our very effort to bring normalcy to the country. Upon the rubbles of the destruction and immense human suffering, in the midst of unfolding trauma and traumatic loss, we had to move beyond the war in order to rebuild our country, restore security, and create stability for all of its people. We had to help individuals to learn to live again, and we had to find ways to help people address the lingering wounds of war while struggling to create new avenues for peace. It required vigor, determination, dedication, and compassion from all members of the society to restore our home and to lay the grounds for a better, more safe, and stable country. The international community assisted us during this reconstruction period. Together, step by step, we managed to restore the infrastructure, deliver basic services to the people, and regain the trust of the public in our newly established institutions. Slowly, we built stable and resilient communities. In order to reduce the risk of emergence and relapse into the violent conflict, we had to work on several different grounds at once. We took an inclusive approach, inviting the different communities living in my country of Kosovo to participate in building a new, safe, and democratic country that would be the home to all of us. The transition period was rough, energy-consuming, and nerve-wrenching. Every single day, with every move we made as a society, with every decision we took, we had to prove to the international community that their commitment to help Kosovo and to help new democracy rise was not wasted. Our efforts to restore safety and security, create resilient and vibrant communities, and develop our democracy culminated with the declaration of the independence of Kosovo back in 2008. With the change of our reality, new challenges has appeared. We had to learn to act as an independent and sovereign state and live up to the expectations of our own people. Making our statehood required actions at all fronts, in politics, in economy, in health, in education, and other areas where progress was so much needed. So, my dear friends, when I took office back in 2011, Kosovo was facing with the turbulent times. The country was in a deep political, social, and economical deadlock. People were striving for change and were desperately in need for a leader who would unify the divided, include those left out, and reach out to those who were almost forgotten by the system. I felt it was my moral duty to meet these expectations and work towards improvement and prosperity to my own country. As a president, and through my entire career, I adhered to the credo of placing my country and my people first. During my 5-year term tenure, I encouraged modesty, tried to learn from my mistakes, stood by ordinary people, and listened to their concerns. I dedicated my work to promoting peace, reconciliation, and dialogue at all levels of our society by expanding the table and adding more chairs to include women, marginalized groups, minorities, and other groups that traditionally have been absent to our conversations and decision-making. I devoted much of my time to spending my days away from my office by organizing visits in the heart of my country, especially at the rural areas, which often are removed from the policy-making centers and yet are at the front line of our decisions. Despite the political achievements and the setback Kosovo had during the first decade after the war, we still haven't come to terms with the war. The wounds of the thousands of the people had not healed, while many of them still had the vivid memories of the war, of the whole population driven to despair, gripped by fear, anxiety, and tensions. I sat for many times with relatives of the missing persons, with the war veterans, and with numerous other survivors of the war. I leaned my ear to listen to their concern, and I lent my shoulder to support those who were desperate, hopeless, and they were tired. But it was only during a meeting with a group of women who were raped by the Serbian paramilitary and military forces during the war that I realized how deeply entrenched fear and anxiety still were for the survivors of the war. Those were visibly anxious. Their hands were shaking. Their voice was trembling, looking at me with an expression I will never forget. Their stories, full of pain and suffering, haunted me for a very long time. More than 20,000 women and men of my country were raped during the Kosovo War. Even though they boldly withstood the horrors of the war, war rape survivors became victims after the war. No space was given to them to tell their stories. No efforts was made to bring their perpetrators to the justice, and no opportunity was given to them to overcome this trauma. The liberty that others enjoyed after the war in 1999 became a prison. They had wrongly put themselves in taking responsibility for what has happened to them. Covered in shame, they have become silent. Their silence had turned into the invisible leather, harm to our society, because by neglecting war rape survivors, we had neglected our own history. By playing deaf, we had ignored their right to demand justice, but by not trying to understand what they had gone through, we undermined their right to tell the world what has Serbia had done to our people. Witnessing the discouraging environment that war rape survivors were surrounded by, I decided to create a platform that would exclusively deal with their problems. Therefore, I initiated the creation of the National Council for the Survivors of the Sexual Violence during the wartime. The Council was the first institutional response to a year-long quiescence and aimed to break the disturbing taboo, to fight the stigma still surrounding the survivors, and to work tirelessly to treat them with respect and dignity, like we had done with all other survivors of the war. Just several weeks after it was established, the Council has managed to push forward the amendments of the existing legislation on the war victims and the survivors. Finally, we recognized the status of the survivors of the sexual violence and granting legal rights to them. The legal aspect was set, and we had to use that momentum. We had to move beyond laws and regulations in order to let the survivors of the sexual violence speak their piece of truth publicly. We had to tell to the world what horrendous crime more than 20,000 women and men of my country of Kosovo had been a target of during the wartime. As politics had failed these women and men for so many years, we had to turn to other methods to break the disturbing taboo and the silence that had surrounded the survivors of the sexual violence during the wartime for the far too long. With the help of the Kosovo-born artist Atifete Jahjaga idea to hang a skirt and dresses in a public area by symbolizing and to symbolize our collective empathy and to support all of the victims. We twisted the unfortunate plot this story was about to have. Together, the artist, my staff, and I, and many other supporters from the civil society, government, and the media, traveled across the country and collected the dresses, many of which had been worn by themselves, the survivors of sexual violence, at the time when they were raped. After thousands of skirts and dresses hung on Pristina football stadium, under the theme, Thinking of You, in June of 2015, on the Liberation Day of Kosovo, war rape was no longer kept under the wraps. The art installation significantly contributed to the process of collective healing and encouraged more victims to come forward with their stories. In the meantime, we had managed to establish an official governmental commission mandated to verify the status of the survivors of sexual violence during the wartime. The legal framework for the commission had been set by the time I ended my term in spring of 2016. But there were many time-consuming legal procedures that had to be completed yet for the commission to become fully functionable. And it was then that, for the first time since I had taken office, some kind of the panic has struck me. I was uncertain if the new government would continue and build on the work we had achieved in granting rights and compensation for the survivors of the sexual violence during the wartime. I was concerned about the prospects of thousands of the raped women and men during the war in seeking the justice. I was troubled by the idea that the issue of the survivors of the sexual violence during the war would again be silenced and be neglected. So, my dear friends, in the darkest time of uncertainty and fear, we find strength and we find courage and we find hope. After I left the office back in 2016, I knew I did no longer have presidential powers to move issues I have worked on forward. However, I decided I will not abandon a cause which over the years had become terribly important to me. I decided that I will not abandon those women and men and leave them faced with another horror, the horror of being ignored again. I continued to meet the survivors of sexual violence, and I continued to encourage them to hang in, to believe in this process. I maintained regular communications with non-governmental organizations which were dedicated to this cause, and I pressured the new government to continue from where we have led the process. Finally, earlier this year, the government approved the budget for the verification process of the survivors of the sexual violence, paving the way for the verification commission for the work to start. The process is ongoing, and we are actively campaigning and calling on all survivors to speak out and tell their piece of truth as for their rights and for the sake of the justice. In March of this year, I established the Jahjaga Foundation, a platform that focuses on creating a just society by empowering the women and youth. The survivors of the sexual violence during the war in Kosovo are an important target group we deal with, and as we believe that only by empowering them economically and politically, we can create conditions for them to live a life with dignity and to live life free of fear. Additionally, in cooperation with the civil society and experts devoted to this cause, we are seeking ways to raise the issue of the survivors of the sexual violence during the war in Kosovo, internationally and internally, in our quest for justice for all of the victims of these horrendous crimes. It will be a long and challenging path to the justice, but I will leave no stone unturned to tell to the world about the brutal war rape enterprise that the Serbian regime conducted in our country during the wartime. We must, once and for all, my dear students, end this devastating culture of impunity and bring all perpetrators of such horrendous crime before the justice. Because by not doing that, we leave a half of the population outside of this debate that has been enough for 20 years out of this. So I thank you very much. Can I have some water?
Thank you very much for that moving speech, Madam President.
I almost lost my voice.
So there'll just be a couple of questions from me, and then I'll open up to the audience. One thing that I really like that you touched upon in your speech was about the importance of youth, and you mentioned how the demographics of Kosovo are very young, and also the country itself is very young. So what were the major challenges that you faced in moving a very young nation forward?
Well, as I said in my early remarks, when I was elected, country of Kosovo was in a very deep political, economical, and social crisis. Within a year, the Constitutional Court of Kosovo discharged from the position or found guilty two presidents before me for the violation of the Constitution, where they have been obliged to resign from their task as the presidents. And so that time I was working in a very credible institution of Kosovo. I was heading the Kosovo police, which had almost 13,000 sworn and civilian staff, and there were three main political parties in Kosovo which has approached me at that time to take an offer and to nominate me for the process of the voting as the president of Kosovo. And so it took 3 men to elect a woman to come and fix their mess that they have created for a couple of years in the role for the ladies here in this room. And so I was very young when I was elected. I was only 35 years of age. I was the youngest democratically elected leader in the world. And on top of that, in a very male-dominated society of Kosovo, which is nothing new for our country, but the entire region of the southeastern part of Europe, which is a very patriarchal society, something new was unfolding, which I kind of like, despite of the challenges that I was about to face, which, telling you the truth, in a very beginning, I was not neither physically, neither psychologically prepared about the challenges that I was about to face when I assumed the office, that many times I did not only had to show about maybe 100 or 200% more, but maybe up to 3,000% more in order to be almost up to the same level of acceptance of the, while it was for the rest of the political class of the country. But I was more focused in about this new chapter that was opening of the opportunities, which I consider which is the biggest capital of our country, especially for the young people of Kosovo. In purpose, I opened my remarks today that over 60% of the population of Kosovo are under the age of the 30. And we have so much of the untapped potential there that that we need to use it. And with my election, that was another spark of the hope for the young people of Kosovo, especially for the young leaders of Kosovo. This is about the young people. When we speak about the women, I was representing the half population. And everywhere in the world, over 50% of the population are the women. In my own society, 51% of the population are the women. And so that's why I kind of introduced, in my term as the President of Kosovo, I introduced a different style of the leadership. And I said earlier, as I said earlier in my remarks, that I kind of expanded and extended this table of the decision making. And I wanted to add more chairs into that process of the decision by having more women, by having more of the young people, by having members of the marginalized groups, of all community groups which are represented in Kosovo, by establishing a totally different platform which would incorporate all the citizens of Kosovo, but sending a totally different message to that.
Thank you very much for that. And one thing I really do appreciate you mentioning is the fact that you were the first female president of Kosovo and the sort of direction you actually tried to take the country like that. What would you say were the main obstacles of being a young woman in politics, and how do you think your election has changed the dynamic of...
Itself of being a woman, it was an obstacle. For most of the males. And actually, in purpose, I mentioned that Kosovo is a very male-dominated society. It's a very patriarchal society. And I think I had a little interview before we entered this room with a wonderful lady here. And so she made me exactly the same question about how was to be the first woman and to enter in a very male-dominated society. And so I work, because the constitutional obligation and the legal obligations are very clear. I was very much conscious what would be my constitutional obligation and my legal obligation heading the state of Kosovo. And so I was very much ready about everything what takes from there. But what I was not ready, and not even being for 5 years as the President of Kosovo, but even now almost 3 years leaving the office as the President of Kosovo, is this the narratives that they were trying to create with a very sexist comments and the approach that over 90% of the comments, especially in my first 2 years being in the office, was not about the policies that I was unfolding, not about the decision that was taken, not about the vision that I was unfolding for the country, but it was mainly about the way of our look, about what she's dressing today, what she's wearing today, what kind of like hairstyle, kind of like bags and shoes and all these kind of things. And so, but I knew that it was the first highest position woman leader that I was assuming that office. And I knew that I would be the one facing with these things. But again, I say that maybe not up into that level that I was about to face and I have faced for this past 5 years and adding to this 2.5 other years after leaving the office on that. And so, but for me, it was about the legacy that I was about to leave in order to create all the other necessary preconditions that other women that are following afterwards on my footsteps to not be able to face with the challenges that I was able to face. So I'm happy to say that that has been reduced in quite of the percentage, but has not been eliminated.
No, and that is a real shame. Another thing that was particularly sort of moving in your speech was about sort of the actions of Serbia, and obviously, I mean, Kosovo is a very culturally rich and diverse nation. And how did you go about sort of uniting and appealing to the different demographics within the country?
Well, in purpose, I mentioned about our past, very difficult past, which has left very deep consequences for my country and for my people. Even now, almost 20 years that we had have entered the war, we still face with a very deep consequence. We still very open wounds there. I mentioned that we have an estimated number of 20,000 women that have been and men that have been raped. where the rape has been used as a tool of war during the wartime in Kosovo by the paramilitary and the military forces of Kosovo. Still, almost 20 years after the end of the war, we have over 1,600 people missing in different massive graves within the territory of Kosovo and the territory of Serbia. And with the refusal, facing at the same time with the refusal by our neighboring country of Serbia to cooperate with the institutions of Kosovo and the people of Kosovo to open the maps and the statistics where are the remains of the loved ones. But despite that fact, we have started the process of the dialogue with the neighboring country of Serbia, which has started back in 2011 in the technical level, and after a year moved in more into the political level. Well, a lot of the agreements has been achieved so far, but we are the big handicaps of the lack of the implementation of these agreements, because all of this agreement has been done in the facilitation of the European Union, and me personally, even as the citizen, but also as the president that time and the former president, I would like to see more of the results into the implementation of this agreement, because we have enough used our citizens as the bargaining chip. It is our obligation that we need to build the bridges of the cooperation. We cannot, and it will be unfair to ask from anyone to forget our past, but we need to forgive in order to move forward. But the justice is the main precondition on moving into this long-lasting peace, which is so much necessary for the entire region of the southeastern part of Europe. The way that Kosovo is being composed, the multi-ethnicity, the multi-religion of Kosovo has been and continues to be one of the biggest advantages and the treasure that our country has continuously built on throughout these decades and the centuries back. Kosovo has one of the most advanced constitutions in the region, where all of the community groups in Kosovo, no matter if they belong to the Kosovo Albanian, which is 90% of the population, or Kosovo Serb, or the Kosovo Roma, or Kosovo Ashkali, or Kosovo Bosniak, or Turkish, or whatever community group member, by the constitution, they enjoy equal rights and equal obligation at the central level and the local level. The Parliament of Kosovo, out of 120 seats, has 10 seats which are reserved for the Serbian community, and all other community groups. Both languages are guaranteed by the constitution of Kosovo at the central level and the local level. Every community group that composed in that, for example, if we have the Mamusha municipality, which is not more than 10,000 people municipality, they have a right to use their own language, which is the Turkish language, at the municipality level. So we have a very advanced constitution, which kind of like has been one of the biggest strengths of our country, which we have just translated into the framework of our constitution and the laws of our country to make the life of our citizens more easily.
How much?
And so for that, sorry, and so for me, in purpose, I can mention that I kind of like didn't see myself to be the president, to sit on my table, to sit in my chair for most of the time, though there were some moments that I had to sit in there. But I dedicated a lot of time to drive around, to go and visit different municipalities, to meet community groups, to meet the citizens across the country, with the majority population, with the minority community as well. And so, because I wanted, like I said, to kind of like have more participation of all community group, no matter of their community background or the religious background, which would make my job easier, and which will be all of their requirements and demands I could be able to translate into my process of the decision making. Because at the end of the day, it was about them, not about my decision, but it was my decision were reflected in the life of my own citizens. So that's why I kind of like try to introduce a different leadership concept, which kind of like in a way reflected to be more effective in the job that I was assumed.
Thank you for that. And while two countries may be able to make peace with the past, how much longer and what actions do you think need to be taken for the people of both countries to reconcile the differences and move things forward?
Well, in purpose I mentioned that the rule of the justice for all, it's very basic to the process of the long-lasting peace in the entire region of southeastern part of Europe. Because I was just referring towards the war in Kosovo. I did not mention the war in Croatia, I did not mention the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where 100,000 other people have been killed and massacred. Only within 3 countries of Kosovo, Bosnia and Croatia, you have an estimated number of 70,000 women raped during the wartime. And so not even in few cases they have been indicted and they have been resultant with the concrete response of the law and the justice into that. And so in purpose I mentioned that the basic to the proper process of the long-lasting peace on that, parallel to other political processes, goes the access to the justice for all, because during the wartime everyone can commit crimes on that, but the responsibility has to be individual in many of the parts of that, except the collective, the state other responsibility in there. And so in that process, we have shown our willingness to start the process of the dialogue under the facilitation of the European Union, which will lead us to the further normalization of the relation between Kosovo and Serbia in that. And so we have moved quite along, but we politicians have a tendency to always believe that the political reconciliation is the reconciliation what we need. I'm afraid that we are wrong on that, or maybe it's just my way of thinking in there, because it's people-to-people reconciliation, that sometimes there is a huge discrepancy between the political decision and the way the people are living and how they are living. And so usually we don't feel very wisely that gap between the political decision and between the people. And so in that part of the region we still have a lot of work to do it to root down this long-lasting peace which is related to the proper reconciliation in the entire region.
And what lessons do you think the international community at large can take from sort of this conflict and the way this conflict has been resolved?
Many times Kosovo for this past 20 years, and in purpose I also mentioned that everything what we have done so far, we have done in the close cooperation, collaboration, and the partnership with the international community, which we have been, and we are grateful for the all support that we have been able to get. And Kosovo has so many times and so numerous times has been bringing the headlines around the world about the success story of the international community. And actually I would make a comma there and add it that there is no concept of the copy and paste that you can take it from here and can bring it there and can have the full function there. I think that the key is among the people, it's among itself the citizens. And I think in the case of Kosovo, the way that the things has moved into the more progress track, the key to that success has been the open mind of the people of Kosovo. Despite of the baggage that they had in the past, they kind of like open a totally different horizon for themselves and for their future generation in order to move forward. And so the combination of the institutions of Kosovo and the openness and kind of like a goodwill of the citizens of Kosovo made Kosovo to be one of the best success story of the international community engagement and this process of the transition and transformation.
Thank you very, very much for answering my questions. I think I'll open up to the audience. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand and wait for a steward to come to you with a microphone. So just over here, I went up very quickly. Sorry.
Hi there.
Hi.
So I had a question. I lived in Albania for a while, and especially I worked with the Roma community over there. And I saw a lot of kind of social tendencies over there, a lot of, I was working directly with them, so a lot of social exclusion in terms of education, the place of women, what was expected of them, what opportunities was open to them. I met a lot of kids that between the age of 5 and 18 were placed in one single classroom because they were Roma Gypsy community. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of them, and I heard a lot of stories of people going over to Kosovo and begging and yeah, going there for financial and social reasons. And I wanted to know what is being done for that particular community, that Roma community in Kosovo, with all the social exclusions that's happening over there, and in the future what can possibly be done to sort it out, because in my experience it was just, it was so hard, and I didn't really see a way out of it and how we could help.
Well, thank you so much, and actually, it's so encouraging to see you are so young and you still dedicated a part of your life and your mission towards the region of the southeastern part of Europe, and particularly towards the Roma and the Ashkali community. I don't know how is their whole situation into the Albania, but I will be focusing more into the experience in Kosovo. And actually, it is very common for all of the countries in the region, because all of the region has quite of the percentage, very small, but it is the same percentage in all of the regional countries with the Roma community, in Albania, in Kosovo, in Macedonia, in Montenegro, in Bosnia, in Serbia. And so they kind of like move, and they kind of like, they're continuously kind of like in a positive way a challenge for all of the local and the central governments of the country, because of in a way, kind of like they want to obey to the system, but at the same time they don't want to play by the system at the same time. And the reason why I say is that because starting from their education and all the way down to the early marriages, or the women which are being forced to the marriage, is something that I have also dealt and has done a lot of campaigns with many of the local and the NGOs and international NGOs in Kosovo to go in many of the Roma communities, starting from trying to convince them not to leave their houses or the shelters which the government of Kosovo was investing on building. And so after a couple of while they were leaving and coming out in the street in a way. And so going to the schools, not allowing, or talking to the parents not to allow their 11 or 12 or 13 years old daughter to be married or anyway. And so we have done so much of the campaigns out of that. So some things will take time to be properly installed into the mentality of this community groups. And it's phenomenon in the entire region. But we as the country, we try to establish the proper legislation in place, starting from the Parliament of Kosovo, where I think we are the first countries in the region which have a reserved seat for all of the community members in the Parliament of Kosovo, where Roma, Ashkali, and other community groups, they have their own representatives within the Parliament of Kosovo. By enabling them to have the legal representatives within the Parliament of Kosovo, so to have more of the empowered position for any future legislation to be amended or to be advanced or in a way. And so we do have some difficulty, not as much as from begging from the inside Kosovo, as much as we have them to be coming from Albania or from Montenegro to beg in Kosovo and then leave from the country. But this is a continuous struggle between the Ministry of the Welfare, between the local security organization and others, and try to make them go as much as away from a street back into the institutions. But I'm afraid this is going to continue, because it's again deals with the way that these community groups see their lives within the community. Because I have been many times, they had a brand new house, an apartment, and so then after a couple of weeks the mayor calls me from there and said, like, they're not anymore in the building. So where they are? They're out in the tents outside somewhere, out in the rain or snow or something. But why the hell you leave this part and come there? So it's something that it will take time for them to be properly settled.
Thank you very much for that question. Yes, just here at the front.
Hello, Mrs. President. Thank you very much for coming along today. So I just wanted to touch on upon one of your policies that you enacted during your time, and that was to root out extremism within Kosovo. And your internal policies were so successful in doing so that you were invited by President Obama to the UN Security Council in 2014, which resolved to fight extremism in general across the world. So I'd just like to ask, how did you go about enacting those policies so successfully, and how can the example in Kosovo be extrapolated to other nations that are facing similar problems today?
Yeah. It all goes down to the leadership and doing our job properly, to justify the vote of the people in there. And I see that you have done quite well of the homework on the research of my job and what I have taken decision. Well, neither Kosovo, neither UK or any other country in the world can be immune towards those global challenges that we have been facing and we are about to face. And especially when we are talking about the violent extremism. Back in 2004, Kosovo was facing with some serious challenges when we speak about the violent extremism and the foreign fighters. Out of the report that I was receiving as the President of Kosovo, as the responsible Commander-in-Chief for the national security, the statistics were showing to me that things are not going in the right direction, neither for Kosovo, neither for any country in the southeastern part of Europe. Because the southeastern part of Europe is one of the most difficult corridors when you speak from the east and towards the west. And so in this particular matter, I paid a special attention on the element which could destabilize my country and the entire region of the southeastern part of Europe. And so it was the August of 2014 that I have taken the decision. As a matter of fact, we were facing with another round of the political crisis that time, because we just finished a round of the parliamentary elections, and we were lacking for almost 6 months of the creation of the institutions of Kosovo, the government of Kosovo, because our ambassador is nodding here because she remembers very well that situation, that the political parties simply couldn't reach to the agreement to create the government. So on the lack of the parliament and the government, most of the executive competencies are being transferred to the president that time. And so I taken a decision back in 2014 to take several steps at the same time. One, to deal with the legislation which made Kosovo the first country in the entire region of the southeastern part of Europe to amend the penal code and penal procedure, which will add an item for sanctioning the foreign fighters up to 15 years of the imprisonment for every time leaving the country to go and fight for this kind of causes. Second is by taking very bold the intelligence and the police operations, which has resulted of around 60 arrests of the foreign fighters in Kosovo, shutting down several of the illegal mosques which were operating in the country, shutting down several of the NGOs which has operated as the front organization mainly for the recruitment of the foreign fighters, and dealing with all of the elements in order to stimulate the regional cooperation and international cooperation in the matters of the fight in the violent extremism, which made Kosovo as the only country in the entire region where not only only the regional countries were coming for the best experience and the expertise out of that, but also many of the European countries, how we were able within few months of the time to create all of the necessary mechanisms in place which brought us a success. So the Security Council, I'm very much pleased that you mentioned this matter of the Security Council, is that Kosovo, by the way, is not a member state of United Nations. And so we have a very limited access as the country into certain activities of the United Nations by being but not being a member state. And so it was a special invitation as the guest of the United States when President Obama back in September of 2014 proposed the resolution for the International Coalition for the Fight Against the Violent Extremism, that Kosovo, because of the success that we have achieved, we were able to be at the same decision-making table and the debating table with over 200 countries around the world on this particular matter. So the main message to that was that you as a country, you need to do your homework if you really want to be taken seriously by the other countries and to be taken as a good example to that.
Thank you very much for that question. Sorry, just here in the middle.
In a red?
Yeah, that's right. Just,
Thank you so much for your discussion, and while I really admire the intersectional and restorative approach that you have, to what extent do you think that has translated into Kosovo's international relations, since there are still very high regional tensions, there are high-stake debates like NATO, and there is still a lot of animosity and opposition, and how is Kosovo dealing with that, and what's its step forward as a regional power? And lastly, what are the lessons that Kosovo has to give to other independence movements like, well, the Catalans, for example? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, from your second part of the question, which is much quicker to answer, Kosovo is a very sui generis case and does not present any similarities to any other country in the world. So independence of Kosovo has been challenged towards the International Court of Justice, and the verdict of the International Court of Justice is the best testimony to the international relation to every country possible around the world that has doubts about the process of the independence of Kosovo, from the lessons point of view, but also from the practical point of view. When we speak about the international situation of Kosovo, as I mentioned earlier in my remarks, Kosovo is being recognized within it because we just celebrated our 10th years of the independence of Kosovo, and over 100 countries around the world has recognized the independence of Kosovo. Over a majority, except 5 countries within the European Union, has recognized the independence of Kosovo. But even those 5 non-recognizers, which is Spain, which is Slovakia, Romania, Greece, and Cyprus, we do have an excellent bilateral relation with all of those non-recognizers. Despite the fact that they do not recognize Kosovo, despite the fact that we have a very good bilateral relation, that they are very big supporters, even within the EU family, except one country, which is Spain so far, that they kind of like the lack of the recognition of these countries towards Kosovo is not because of Kosovo. It's mainly due to their internal matters within their own issue. And you can pick the country and you can put the example why it did not happen so far. And so with those countries we have an excellent relations. Same thing relies also within the NATO member states. And the goal or the aim of Kosovo, neither for Kosovo, actually neither for any other country in the southeastern part of Europe, we have no other alternative than the EU membership and the NATO membership. We are physically and geographically already there, so we have been historically a part of that. So it's just these final processes that we need to fool with, which I translate in a type of the homework that we need to do it as the countries, because for the UK it's a totally different question there. But when we speak about the EU integration, these are a kind of like give and take process. So it's about the relation between the aspiring country and itself, the EU. So these are the rules of the games here. Whoever fulfills these requirements has an open path towards the European Union. And we, as the regional countries, Croatia has been the last country almost 5 years ago that has become a member state of the European Union. All of us are in that pipeline of the process of the integration. One country, one step or two steps forwards and backwards, but all of us are approximately the same situation.
Thank you very much for that question. I think we've got time for one more, but there will be a meet the speaker session afterwards if you were not chosen, sorry. So just over here.
Hi, thank you for your speech today. I wanted to ask, and I've been wondering, does talking about rape and issues like rape, for example, become more acceptable by the society if they are brought up by women politicians or activists, and why is that?
Well, thank you so much for making this question, because I usually don't leave any of the audiences without them making this question to me, and which is another one which I would be surprised if you would not ask me today, but maybe we'll have a chance afterwards. These 20,000 survivors of the sexual violence, that I use a term that they are my biggest pain and my biggest pride at the same time. Why say this? Because what they have gone through during the wartime, you cannot even imagine. When I took over the office back in 2011, it was literally in my first 3 weeks that I met the first group of the survivors of the sexual violence. What I've seen that day, it has changed me forever. The reason why I say is that, because first of all, I couldn't believe what has happened to my own country and to the women of Kosovo. And second, to our shame as the people of Kosovo, as the institutions of Kosovo, why we have kept this topic under the wraps for far too long, 15 years after the end of the war when I was elected, because of the mentality norms and because of the way of thinking of our country. When I met a mother that she was raped exactly same day with her 3 daughters. She was only 37 years of age. Her oldest daughter was 17. The other one was 15. The youngest one was 13 with a Down syndrome. Her mother was visiting her that day. Without being able to cope what has happened to her daughter and granddaughter, she went outside, jumped into the well of water, and committed suicide. When I met a mother that she was kept for 6 months in a factory by paramilitary forces, raping her every single minute. And when they left that location, they raped even her 5-year-old daughter. When I met the women, which, sorry for the mans, which they had cut their breasts with their knives, 4 S's cut throughout their body, cigarette shots in throughout their body, I simply couldn't believe that this has happened to us. This could happen to me. This could happen to every other woman of my country. And I made promise to that moment for myself and on behalf of all other women of Kosovo that then it was about me and the rest of the institutions of the country. Because that time when I started this discussion, I was alone. Nobody was supporting me. Neither parliament, neither government, neither the general public. Because, Madam President, this topic supposed not to be opened. What has happened, and we need to close that chapter. No, we are not going to close that chapter. It has been enough closed for 15 years. And we have done much more injustice towards all of the survivors than those horrendous crimes that has been conducted. My first trial was back in 2012, immediately, almost 1 year after I was elected, when I organized the International Summit of Women, together with Secretary Albright that time in Kosovo, by bringing over almost 200 leaders from the world in Pristina, capital of Kosovo. As an outcome of the conference or the summit were the Pristina principles. One of the basic principles was the legal recognition of the survivors of the sexual violence as civilian victims of the wartime, which did not pass in the Parliament of Kosovo. It took me another 2 years of the process to fight the daily politics of our institutions to find the proper legislative base for me to act, to recognize their status that I mentioned earlier by inaugurating the National Council for the Survivors of the Sexual Violence, which literally 1 month after its function recognized their legal status, and the law has been amended by recognizing their legal status as the civilian victims of the war, which was the first platform which was established to tackle rehabilitation, reintegration, and resocialization, including the economic empowerment and the access of the medical services for all of the survivors of the sexual violence. At the same time, working on building on and continuously working on addressing the stigma which was dominating for over 15, 16, 17, and 18 years after the end of the war. Trying to create a platform for first of all, for the victims to speak up what has happened to them and not to be abandoned by their family members, not to be abandoned by the institution and by the general public. I used art. I used the public speaking. I used all of the supporters and the good ambassadors of Kosovo to be their voice, because what they needed is just an ear that could listen to them and a voice that could speak on their behalf. That I have landed that, and I offered the office of the Presidency of Kosovo to be their biggest advocate. That time and even this time. Situation is slightly different than used to be back in 2011, that used to be back in 2012, and then used to be back in 2015 when the law has been approved. Now it's not anymore a topic that cannot publicly be spoken in Kosovo. Now everyone speaks about what has happened towards the women of Kosovo. They're not only cornered in one side that you are pointing the fingers towards them, that you are the shame of our community. But we have raised their voice and their confidence that by making them the heroines of our community. But what we have been lacking, and we are still lacking on this, which relates to your first points, is tackling this culture of impunity, which is dominated for far too long. For almost 20 years after the end of the war, we do not have even a single perpetrator that has been found guilty for this horrendous crime, neither in the courts of Kosovo, neither into the international justice. So this culture of impunity which is dominating, it's in a way undermining all other processes to raise the awareness and to tackle the stigma, which is not only dominated among the survivors of the sexual violence in Kosovo, but elsewhere. I mentioned Bosnia, I mentioned Rwanda, I mentioned 100 other places around the world. UK has been one of the best examples. And actually it started from here with former Secretary Haig and Angelina Jolie, which they have immediately after declaring of the rape as a tool of war after the war has taken place in Bosnia-Herzegovina. On that, they have taken these international initiatives with international protocol, which was able to establish this international platform to bring the countries around, starting from their exchange of the expertise and experience and the lessons learned, how to deal bestly with these kind of things. Because you don't have to create so much of those things and to be so innovative on that. Crime is a crime. You just need to find the ways how to solve it as soon as possible. But globally, we are failing on this tackling the culture of impunity, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much for that question. I can't imagine a more sort of important topic to end on. So if you could all join me in thanking Madam President for her time.